Next on the news, Pope Francis in search of healing, joining with the Indigenous people on a pilgrimage in Canada. Also, another big interest rate hike by the Federal Reserve as it tries to tame inflation in the U.S. And Bishop Robert Brennan joins the faithful for a celebration of the feast day for Saints Joachim and Anne. Plus, paramedics respond to a church parking lot on a Sunday morning, but it was for a very joyous reason. I'm Christine Persichetti. Current News starts right now. It was a time to reflect for Pope Francis as he prayed at Lac Ste, the site of one of Canada's most famous Catholic pilgrimages. The lake is known for its miraculous healings, and Pope Francis's visit is just another step in his journey to bring about healing for the Indigenous people in the country. This serene lake, known for its healing powers, one of the most significant stops in Pope Francis's Canadian journey. Lac Ste. Is the site of famous Catholic pilgrimages, which began at the end of the 19th century, and it's a place of spiritual importance for the nation's Indigenous people. The Holy Father blessed the lake following the Indigenous customs, making the sign of the cross in the direction of the 4 cardinal points. He then read a blessing in English.
And gave us His Spirit and His first gift.
Finally, Francis went to the lake shore to pray in silence, then sprinkled water from the blessed lake on those present. Afterwards, a crowd of about 10,000, mostly Indigenous people, attended a liturgy of the Word at the shrine of St. Anne, where Pope Francis was given a handmade stole in the Indigenous style. The pontiff compared Lac St. to the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus preached.
Dios eligió ese contexto poliédrico y heterogéneo para anunciar al mundo algo revolucionario. Por ejemplo, pongan la otra mejilla, amen a los enemigos.
Because it was the feast day of St. Anne, the grandmother of Jesus, as he did at Mass earlier in the day, the Pope spoke about grandparents.
La fe raramente nace leyendo un libro, nosotros solos en un salón, sino que se difunde en un clima familiar. Se transmite en la lengua de las madres, con el dulce canto dialectal de las abuelas.
The Pope told the Indigenous in attendance that they are precious to him and to the Church and asked for the Lord's help in the healing process. Joining us now to talk about the Holy Father's continued journey is John Allen, editor of Crux. Hi, John.
Hey, Christine.
Nice to see you again. So this visit to Lac Ste. Goes with the theme of the Pope's whole trip, healing and reconciliation. The Holy Father's actions seem to be well received, but there are some Indigenous who say they don't think his efforts will change anything. Do you think healing is taking place?
My perception is that up to this point, in general, I think there has been satisfaction for what the Pope has said, particularly the apologies that he has delivered. I also think there are a lot of people in the Indigenous community who are saying, as important as that apology is, we want to see what it means, that is, what action will follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody has an opinion, and there's been controversy over the headdress. On Tuesday, a chief and residential school survivor gave the Pope a headdress and placed it on his head, but it struck a nerve with some in the Indigenous community. Do you think the negative attention surrounding that is taking away from the significance of the gesture?
It is not at all surprising that a gesture, which was obviously intended to be sort of affectionate, from one elder to another in a way, because it was one of the elders who had met with the Pope earlier in the trip who put the headdress on his head. It's not surprising that there are some Indigenous who are not entirely comfortable with it. Those headdresses aren't just like something you take off the shelf. Each of the feathers there are supposed to have significance. They represent acts of bravery, acts of courage, acts of compassion. They're supposed to be earned, and I think there are some Indigenous who think, hey, they haven't been earned yet. But I don't think we should lose sight of the mammoth historical transition in terms of the role and the aims of the Catholic Church that all this represents.
Right. All right, getting back to the lake, which is obviously significant to the indigenous people, but it's also significant to Pope Francis. How do you think his love of creation, which we see in his encyclical Laudato Si, is represented in events like this one?
Well, I don't think we should forget that for indigenous cultures, and this certainly includes the indigenous peoples of Canada, reverence for the earth, for creation, is a kind of, if you'll pardon the pun, cardinal virtue. And the fact that this Pope is himself such an ardent environmentalist, such an ardent champion of care of creation, I think that plays extremely well with his hosts, in part because it is so obviously sincere. This isn't just a rhetorical one-off that he kind of adopted for the Canada trip.
Okay, so much to talk to. I'm sure we'll catch up with you again this week. John Allen, editor of Crux, thanks for being here.
Anytime, Christine.
On Wednesday, the Holy Father held a host of meetings with government leaders, such as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Indigenous leaders. The private gatherings happening at the Citadelle de Quebec, the largest British fortress built in North America. The historic site sits on the banks of the St. Lawrence River, and it's one of the official residences of Canada's Governor General, Mary Simon. Simon serves as the representative of the head of state, Queen Elizabeth, and is the first Indigenous person to hold the title. The Holy Father also met with Simon at the Citadel. Francis also meeting with about 100 officials, diplomats, and Indigenous leaders. The Canadian government officially recognizes 3 Indigenous groups in the country: the First Nations people, Inuits, and Métis. More than 1.6 million people in the country identify as Indigenous, according to a 2016 census. They are the fastest growing population in Canada, growing almost 50% between 2006 and 2016. The group is also the youngest population. About 44% of Indigenous in Canada were under the age of 25 in 2016. The Pope and the Holy See have worked hard to highlight Indigenous culture in every part of this papal trip, especially in the official logo. The swirling blue image was created by a Winnipeg-based Métis graphic designer who has worked with Indigenous communities and organizations for years. Among some of the symbols he used, a dove representing the Holy Spirit and the Church, the keys of St. Peter to represent the Pope, symbols for the Métis and Inuit culture, as well as various nature elements. All of it comes together in a circle, showing all are equal and visible. And it is those cultures that were highlighted in a special public program happening not far from where the papal meetings took place. The event at the Plains of Abraham focused on the theme of reconciliation, featuring both French and English Catholic artists who bear witness to the encounter of cultures and spiritualities. Yesterday, a group of Indigenous embarked on a great walk of healing, hiking more than 170 miles from the last residential school to the Plains of Abraham, arriving at the heart of the program. A delegation planned to speak on the main stage about the experience and the goal of healing and reconciliation in solidarity with residential school survivors. The Holy Father was set to pass by the event on his Pope mobile. The Holy Father has called his trip to Canada a penitential pilgrimage, a first step in healing for Indigenous survivors. It was in May of 2021 when news broke that unmarked graves of Indigenous children had been found at the grounds of a former residential school. It was that discovery that led to Indigenous visiting the Vatican and then the Pope heading to Canadian soil to apologize there. Let's look into how the graves were discovered. It was actually drones searching Canadian soil that led to the news. The ground-penetrating radar peering into every layer and discovering so-called disturbances, soil anomalies that could lead to the unmarked graves of Indigenous children. But those reports were only a preliminary report of what the drones discovered. The soil still needs to be excavated, and until then, scientists do not know exactly what will be found at the site. On Monday, the Holy Father apologized to the Indigenous people for the abuses suffered by children at the residential schools run by the Church. Indigenous chiefs and survivors gathered to talk about the Holy Father's apology, and they discussed how to move forward following their meetings with the Pontiff. Kelsey Gussie reports.
Chiefs and survivors of the Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations shared their responses to the Pope's historic apology. For some, it was a moment to reflect on those who did not survive, those friends and families who did not have the chance to tell their stories. It reminded the survivors, also known as thrivers, of their mission in making these stories known.
I promised them that I would be their voice. I promised them that I would go out there and tell the truth. You know, it's about truth, justice, healing, reconciliation. But one thing that Willie talked about today is hope. We have to bring and encourage hope to our communities.
But Pope Francis's apology does not mean forgetting the pain and sadness of the past. Words are not enough to end, as Chief Desmond Bull calls it, the intergenerational trauma these families endured.
Instead of getting over it, I'm asking you to get with it. Get with learning about our history. Get with learning about our culture, our people, who we are. Get with reaching out to your neighboring Métis, Inuit, or First Nations person and learn more about them. You want to help with our healing? Get with part of our healing and be part of that journey.
Though the path of understanding and healing will take years, Grand Chief George Arcan believes Pope Francis's trip to Canada is the Church's first step in making amends with the Indigenous people.
After meeting with the Pope and hearing his words today, I believe there's a path forward together. There's a lot of work to be done. Today, I believe we begin a new journey. Today, I believe we now start to have to do the work necessary to make things better. And I sit by my fellow chiefs and survivors to build that new road, to create a better place for our people to live.
That was Kelsey Gussie reporting. Pope Francis's schedule is filled with important events that focus on Indigenous people. The Holy Father will speak at a Mass on Thursday at the National Shrine of Saint Anne de Beaupré, a renowned pilgrimage destination that merges Catholicism and Indigenous culture. Later, there will be Vespers at the First Church in Quebec City, the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Both of those spiritual events will be rebroadcast on Net TV. The Mass at the National Shrine will air at 1 p.m. and the Vespers will air at 8:30 p.m. On his final day in Canada, the Pope will hold private meetings at the residence of the Archbishop of Quebec, including with the delegation of Indigenous people from Eastern Canada. He will then fly to Iqaluit, where he will meet with residential school survivors before attending a public community event hosted by Inuit leaders outside a local elementary school. Be sure to stay with Currents News and the tablet for continuing coverage of the papal trip to Canada and the Pope's efforts to connect with the Indigenous people. There's a lot more news headed your way. Brooklyn Bishop Robert Brennan celebrated the feast day of Saints Joachim and Anne in a special way. We'll show you this a day after another celebration. The Shepherd of Brooklyn looks back on 10 years as a bishop. And a baby girl makes quite an entrance into the world. God was watching out for her and her parents.
There are now some big changes to the tablet website. You can get personalized access to the Catholic news you value. Sign up for free at thetablet.org.
The Bishop of Brooklyn, Robert Brennan, joined parishioners of St. Joachim and Anne Catholic Church in Queens Village on Tuesday to celebrate the feast day of their patron saints. Honoring the grandparents of Jesus with songs, prayers, and worship, parishioners celebrated the feast of Saints Joachim and Anne with a multicultural mass in Latin, English, Creole, and Spanish. Remarking on how well Joachim and Anne did in raising the Blessed Mother Mary, Bishop Brennan called on the faithful to cherish our families.
Let's honor our parents. Let's honor our grandparents. Let's honor all those people who nourish us in the spiritual life. Like Joachim and Anne, prepare us and nourish us. God has planted that gift of faith within us.
Following the Mass, there was a procession with the statues of Saints Joachim and Anne through the neighborhood, and then the night ended with a final blessing. The feast has been a part of the life at the parish since it was founded in 1896. Earlier this week, Bishop Brennan celebrated a milestone day in his service to God's people. It was 10 years ago Monday that he was officially ordained a bishop. The shepherd of Brooklyn, of the Brooklyn Diocese, celebrated the anniversary with parishioners at the Cathedral Basilica of St. James, who were also marking a milestone themselves. On that same day, 200 years ago, the cornerstone of St. James was laid down. In celebration of Bishop Brennan's 10 years, we're learning more about how he became a bishop, but you'll have to pick up this week's tablet to find out more. Also in the paper, a story that shows a public statement of faith. Every Tuesday during the summer, parishioners gather at the grotto at Our Lady of Lourdes Church in Queens Village to pray the rosary. Dozens sit on folding chairs to join in. The rosaries are prayed in 5 languages, hymns in praise of the Blessed Mother are sung, and gospel readings are heard. But this simple summer act has become a beacon of hope for some, and you can pick up the paper to find out more. So to read these stories and more, just go to your local church and get the tablet newspaper. You can also get future editions sent right to your mailbox by subscribing online at thetablet.org. The Federal Reserve has raised a key interest rate, a hefty 3/4 percentage point, as the U.S. economy continues to struggle. Economists hope the move will tame inflation, which sits at a 40-year high, as Americans struggle to buy essential items amid rising prices. Isabel Rosales has the latest details.
And it's a struggle. It is a real struggle.
Prices are soaring. Many families are having a hard time paying their credit card bills. The stock market has tanked this year. Home sales have started to slip, and consumer confidence is low. For many Americans, it already feels like a recession.
Especially when I look at the price, I'm like, this is unbelievable. It's ridiculous, but what can you do?
The Federal Reserve hiking the interest rate by 3/4%. For Americans, it means the cost of borrowing has gotten even more expensive.
Looking forward, the risk of recession is unfortunately high.
The R word, a sticky and fiercely debated topic. Industry experts and politicians disputing whether we're already in or heading into a recession.
It's basically, the best described as it's a very weird economy. I'm not sure we've really experienced anything quite like this, where you have an inflationary environment with a really strong labor market.
But most Americans already believe they're in a recession.
You're talking about people that have their own level of recession daily and have had it for years.
Beyond all the growing noise of economic data, perception can quickly turn into reality as consumers tighten their pocketbooks.
Now you look at the prices and you're like, I just won't get it.
Isabel Rosales, Currents News.
President Joe Biden has now left isolation after testing negative for COVID twice. Officials say the president contracted the highly transmissible BA.5 Omicron subvariant, which is now the predominant strain in the U.S. The president had been isolating for the past 5 days, holding his meetings virtually and addressing groups through recorded messages. To the pro-life fight now, and a new Texas law increasing penalties for abortion providers will go into effect on August 25th. The Texas Trigger Law will boost criminal and civil penalties associated with the procedure. Abortion in the state is already virtually outlawed under an old statute in effect before the High Court decided Roe v. Wade in 1973. Over in Indiana, lawmakers narrowly advanced a plan to ban nearly all abortions in that state. It comes after a tense Tuesday in the Indiana Senate chamber where several hundred people spoke for and against the proposed abortion bill. Indiana is one of the first state legislatures to debate tighter abortion laws since the Supreme Court overturned Roe last month. To West Virginia, where lawmakers there are debating just how strict an abortion ban will be. Governor Jim Justice is calling for the state's ban on abortion to be, quote, modernized. Changes to the measure include exceptions for an ectopic pregnancy and medical emergencies. But the governor says ultimately life must be protected.
We don't need in any way to think of anything other than doing what's right for the unborn.
The Republican-led legislature in West Virginia has rejected efforts by Democrats to add exceptions for rape and incest to the legislation. Still to come on Currents News, there's a new Manhattan museum about a Brooklyn native who broke the color barrier. A sneak peek inside the new Jackie Robinson Museum. And talk about a scare on a Sunday. Paramedics respond to a church parking lot because an expectant mother was about to give birth. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. After 14 years of planning, fundraising, and delays, the brand new Jackie Robinson Museum in Lower Manhattan is finally finished. And to help commemorate the long-awaited opening was the 100-year-old widow of the late great Brooklyn Dodger, Rachel Robinson, who cut the ribbon at the grand opening on Tuesday. The nearly 9,000 square foot museum is an interactive experience telling the story of Robinson's baseball career, how he broke the color barrier, and the role he played in the civil rights movement. The museum will officially open to the public on September 5th. Now to another honor, and this one's been long overdue. On Tuesday, a 102-year-old World War II veteran received one of the highest civilian honors from Congress, a Congressional Gold Medal. Catherine Romay Johnson Davis was presented the medal in Montgomery, Alabama, recognizing her for her service to the 6888th Central Postal Directory Battalion. It was the only all-black, all-female unit to serve in World War II. At the end of the war, the battalion never received any accolades until now.
I never would have thought that anything like this could happen to me and never see a uniform before. I lost mine on my way home. And the congressional medals for all of us. For all of us. Those who've gone and those who remain.
Congrats to her. Tuesday's award ceremony also marked the 74th anniversary of when the armed forces were desegregated. It was a special delivery in the middle of a church parking lot. Paramedics in Tennessee jumped into action to help an expectant mother deliver her baby. Brandon Tierney has the story.
It's a call firefighters say you could go your entire career without responding to. Helping a woman give birth in this church parking lot around 1:30 Sunday morning right after they arrived on scene.
Went to the patient, introduced myself, and by the time I got my name out, the baby was introducing herself to me, and I'm like, oh, this is happening.
Critical care paramedic Fabian Odin was the one who caught the baby girl as it was born. In total, 4 volunteer firefighters from the Murray County Fire Department went on the call. He says it was a very unusual situation, but 911 operators helped the family get situated before they got there.
6 strangers showing up, delivering your baby that you never met, and it's dark outside.
This was the first time Fabian and his partner Savannah Madison delivered a baby. She says while they keep kits in every truck for this type of situation, they were lucky to also have medical training.
We do have to be prepared for any situation, so it's often that we walk into something new, but our training is so important in that and really helps us out, and that was so clear at this incident.
After the baby was delivered, she was taken to the hospital along with her mother. Father Jimmy Lee Farnsworth tells us they brought Kyler Shaden home from the hospital Monday afternoon. She's healthy and her siblings went crazy when they got to meet her. Also making an impact on the lives of the first responders who helped welcome her into this world.
Although it was chaotic, it was so life-changing and just a moving moment for all of us involved, so we were very thankful for that.
We can either be going to CPR in progress, or we can either be going to delivering the baby, so every time those tones drop, it's kind of like, all right, is it a wild card or is this the usual? And that one was a wild card.
But a wild card they were grateful to help with.
That was Brandon Tierney reporting. The firefighters that helped welcome the baby into the world say they look forward to meeting her again. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.